So it's an exciting time actually to be in this field because you know, you're just seeing a lot of changes, and
Yeah.
and then you're just right here, and you can see the knowledge growing day by day, and our understanding growing day by day. It's a slow process, of course,
Mm-hmm.
but um, yeah. She was saying some of the same tricks that she's using for eDNA are apparently helping with the sponges. You know, because you think about it, trying to extract DNA from seawater, just sort of loose,
Yeah.
wow, that's pretty amazing. But what they've learned trying to do this has actually helped them working with sponges too. So
Yeah, it's incredible how they're adapted to different techniques, adapted to different challenges.
I can't say genetics was the course that I did the best in grad school.
Too.
I did okay, at least, but boy, it's complex. So my hat's off to geneticists.
Mm-hmm.
It's really something else. If you're just joining us now, taking a look at the dive, you're a little bit too late because we're headed back to the surface, but you're not late at all if you're interested in water column animals. In fact, your timing is almost perfect because we've been on the seafloor for quite a while today, and now we're heading back up to the surface. It'll take about 3 hours to get up there. So we're very likely going to see some water column animals on this journey to get the ROV back on deck.
So
We had that question about the max depth of the ROV.
that's 4,000 meters, right? But today we went.
Yeah.
How deep did we
Yeah,
go
we were
today?
just
3,000.
we were just over 3,000, really, but that was the target drop site depth was 3,002 meters. But
So coming up, it's really like 1,000 meters per hour.
yeah.
Coming up,
Yeah, I
bringing the
know.
ROVs.
At about, we're coming up right now at 17 meters per minute. There's an exercise for viewers at home. Multiply that by 60 to get your meters per hour.
And how deep are we?
Right now, 2491.
All right, you mathematicians out there, come on, pull out your calculators. When are we going to get to the surface here? And meanwhile, Trevor, we had a question about what is the max depth that the ROV can go?
Yeah, so Hercules is rated to 4,000 meters. Argus is rated to 6,000 meters, except for we have a couple of 4,000 meter rated instruments on there right now, so not in its current configuration. OET also has a couple other vehicles, Atalanta and Little Hercules, and those are 6,000 meter vehicles. They're both slightly smaller. Little Hercules is a smaller version of Herc with no manipulators or hydraulics, more of an inspection imaging vehicle than a sampling vehicle. And Atalanta is a smaller, more modern version of Argus, which is fully rated to 6,000 meters. The cable on the ship is 7,000 meters long, which gives us a little bit of buffer for maintenance or whatever. So we are, with the equipment on board, we are able to go to 6,000 meters water depth.
So if you had a 7,000 meter cable, and let's say your ROV could go to any depth, how deep would you deploy it? You got to have some of the cable still on the spool.
Exactly, yes. So 7,000 meter cable, we're limited by the depth rating of the vehicles. And that was the intention of buying the 7,000 meter cable, is to keep the limiting factor only the vehicle rating, not the cable length.
Right. So would you, just hypothetically, if the ROV could go deeper, would you leave 1,000 meters on the spool, or how much would you leave on it?
So that's a good question. The rule we run by is there needs to be 10 wraps on the core of the winch drum. So obviously as you deploy cable, the wraps of the winch go off and kind of goes back to the left and the right and the left to the right of the winch until the final layer shows and you can actually see the center of the winch drum. We want to have 10 twists around that winch drum, called 10 wraps, basically 10 cable widths on that winch drum at all times. So that is our limiting factor. So that would be approximately, I don't know, 100 meters or so on the winch. I'm making that number up. I don't know what it actually is. But yeah, that's the limiting factor.
The point is that you can get almost all the cable off of it, but you still need enough to really hold it very carefully onto the spool, I guess.
Exactly, yeah.
You know, one of the issues that I heard about years ago is that you don't want to dive too shallow because a lot of the cable is still on the spool when you're diving very shallow, and then the cable, all the electricity and everything that goes through it generates heat, and you can actually get overheating. Is that still a problem, or is that not a problem?
That is not a problem with this system. This system is designed to operate at full power at full drum capacity, but there are definitely other systems where that that affects it, and they have active cooling on the drum, for example. I've heard of systems that have like almost like a little water fountain that cools down the drum. But yeah, all the electricity going through a big solid mass of cable and metal heats it up, and the metal expands when it's hot, and it has nowhere to go because it's trapped in this high tension winch wire. So it wants to expand but doesn't have anywhere to expand to, and ends up causing problems in the cable. So luckily our system does not draw enough electricity for that to matter. I think we're under it by, I want to say a couple, like 2 horsepower or something under where that matters. We're at about a 20 horsepower system plus Argus. So probably a total power draw of 25 to 28, and 31 is our limiting factor.
Okay. Well, I've got a completely different type of question for you, and it's for mythology. So you got Hercules and you have little Hercules, but did Hercules have a son or a daughter?
Little Hercules came first. That's not what you're asking, but that's
no,
my
I'm
answer.
asking you've got
That's the
Hercules
chicken
and
or
little
the egg.
Hercules, so you would name like an offspring of Hercules, little Hercules, right?
Well,
So
little Hercules came first. So I don't know if little Hercules is the offspring. Hercules is the offspring of little Hercules.
Ah, okay. All right, that's where we're getting. So it's not Hercules' son, it's maybe a younger anyway. I guess that joke didn't really go very far, did it?
I don't know enough about mythology to help you out there. Sorry.
Well, their little parents will have very big children.
Yeah.
I don't know how much of old mythology involves shrink rays, but that might have been something to do with little Herc.
So what is Argus referring to? What is? I don't know enough about mythology to know what Argus means.
Oh, I've heard of this one. Something about it was an old mythological god, perhaps, that had a bunch of eyes. That was what something like that. I can't quite remember.
But
I think
that
it's on
makes
the website.
that makes sense because Argus is looking out for Herc.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what they call it. That I was actually reading that on the website last night. So.
So you're the most up to date on it.
Well, I try. Well, I think I forgot already. But yeah, I really like these mythological names.
So it says here that Argus was a 100-eyed giant in Greek mythology.
Wow. Okay. You know, one of the things many years ago with some of the earlier types of ROVs, they didn't have this camera sled ROV configuration. Often they would have a little ROV house, you know, where it was sort of a cage that would be attached to the ship, and then you'd have a tether to the ROV coming out of this cage. And the idea was, again, to isolate the ship movement, or to isolate the ROV from the ship's surface movement. But
I love that way to describe it. ROV house, that is very cute.
It is, because you would drive right in, and we operated this at the University of Hawaii. We used to call it the RCV 150, a very, very old model ROV. And you had to drive it in and out of this house. You had to deploy it out, and then at the end of the dive, you'd have to go back in.
Yeah, I've just never heard it called a house before. TMS or cage or whatever, but
That's right.
House is great. I like house.
Yeah, TMS, tether management system is what that stands for. But yeah, I always, being a biologist, considered it a house, of course. But the disadvantage of that is that TMS couldn't really keep the ROV out of trouble. You didn't really have very good camera systems on it. And so going up steep terrain was pretty challenging. Whereas the system that you have and others have, the more modern systems, that sled is absolutely crucial when you're talking about vertical walls, because it can see the whole tether in the ROV from a distance and make sure everything is clear of entanglement hazards and things.
I've definitely come on another system, come back to the TMS to recover the vehicle and found the TMS full of mud. So that definitely happened. Oh, that wasn't what we wanted.
Yeah, I've actually seen our old TMS banging against the wall as it was going up there. And,
yep,
you know,
you'll have that too.
But yeah, this configuration we've got on the Nautilus right now is really amazing. I mean, the type of terrain that you can navigate is just astonishing. I mean, you've been down to the Line Islands and you know how sheer the walls are down there.
Yeah.
It's so. All right, we got anything else in the?
Well, Jason says that he has been following you since 2015.
Oh, is that
started
right?
watching. Yeah.
Oh, terrific. Well, thank you, Jason. And Nautilus and Falcor, so, yep.
Yeah, we're giving it a little heart, this comment.
Yeah.
For our records.
Well, Jason, keep the questions coming and all of the comments. We really appreciate them, and we'll definitely answer them as best we can.
And then the viewer was asking, what was that long thing with pink? That was the coral, the bamboo coral.
Oh, yeah, yep,
yeah.
That's right. If that's what they're referring to.
Yes, I think that's what they meant.
Okay.
So if we've got, what, almost 3 hours ascent, and then another hour and a half to our next location. So that's about 4, so 9. So we'll probably be putting in around 10 or 11?
Probably at the watch change, so it'd be around noon.
Noon, okay.
Yeah, but I mean, that hasn't been established yet, because our ROV team, I think, needs 4 hours to turn the vehicle around to do the maintenance they need. So it may even be the 4 o'clock afternoon.
Just when we're coming back and biologists return.
Yes.
For 24 hours?
Yeah, we're going to do a real long one.
Yeah.
Right now, the plan is to try to do 4 kilometers. I'm not sure we're going to make it. That's ambitious. But
so what kind of tools would we need to bring aboard Hercules?
Well, it's going to be our standard package, so we're going to have some water samplers. We're going to change the jaws on the manipulator to what they call a coral cutter jaw. It's a very specialized jaw that actually has some Tygon tubing, if I'm not mistaken, to be able to grab it. And it's got a very sharp edge on it, so you can very cleanly cut a branch of the coral without doing a lot of damage. The jaws we have on this particular dive.
I'm gonna slow down a bit here.
It could kind of tear the coral up a bit. It's not the best, particularly some of these flexible corals that are hard. They're not hard. If it was a brittle coral, you know, you could just break it, snap it off really quickly. But like that Remula gorgia, I think that would be probably a nightmare to try to collect with this particular jaw that we got on. But these jaws are good for rocks.
They are. They're
So does that mean
rock
that
squeezing jaws.
we won't be able to collect rocks in the next dive?
Oh, we'll be able to collect
we're
bigger
always
rocks
going to
on the
collect
next dive.
rocks.
Well,
Okay.
But
Yeah.
because it's a very long dive and because we'll probably get the rocks, you know, I don't know exactly when, but we have so much time to
I'm just kidding. I'm going faster.
get the
I lied to you
rocks.
completely.
We want to be able to also
I lied.
sample some other
I'm going faster
other
than
types
I was.
of
Not
things.
slower.
oh, shrimp.
Oh.
Missed it. There he
There it
is.
is.
Fine.
Wow, that's a pretty bright orange, red
Yeah,
fish.
yeah, red.
Where did my Halloween candy end up?
Oh, here. I'll bring it over.
Don't feed the shrimp.
Yes.
So ROV guys, why is the descent is at what, 25 meters per minute, and
That's
the
right.
ascent is at what, 17 meters per minute? So what's the difference?
What's the deal?
Yeah, what's
the
the
deal, man?
Gravity?
Well, we're loaded up with samples. That could help.
Oh, all those rocks.
The
Forgot about the rocks.
The true answer is it mainly comes down to the structure of Hercules itself. So imagine, look at the vehicle. The vertical thrusters are on the top, right in the yellow foam block, right?
Yeah.
And imagine if you're thrusting down, pushing down, trying to send the vehicle to the bottom. That's the thrusters push the water up, making the vehicle go down, right? So the thrusters are at the top of the vehicle, and they're pushing water up. The water just, it works. It just goes, and it's very efficient. Now imagine you're trying to bring the vehicle up and pushing the water down. Where those thrusters are positioned, that forces all that water into the vehicle itself.
Yeah.
So it's the equivalent of trying to power a sailboat with a fan. You know, you're trying to push the, like hold the fan on the sailboat and try to make that your wind. It doesn't really work very well. It's a lot less efficient. So it needs a more efficient water path, but you can't have vertical thrusters on the bottom of your vehicle because then you end up, you know, grinding it into rocks and stuff. So that's the real reason, the main reason for the slower ascent rate.
Wow.
So really, you're just pulling up on the wire. You're not using the thrusters. Where when you're going down, if I understood you correctly, you're also thrusting down while you're releasing the wire. Is that correct?
We do not pull up on Herc with the wire. We pull up on Argus obviously with the wire, but Herc ascends and descends with thrusters alone. So because of the inefficiencies with the thruster, it goes slower. But the thrusters still do work. So we're using them. I'm at 100% vertical thrust up, which is getting about, you know, between 15 and 18 meters a minute.
I see. Yeah, excuse me. I had a little senior moment there.
That's
that
all right.
Argus is the one that's attached to the ship, and that's what's. But is the cable actually used to pull it up, or is it are you coming up? Is the cable just keeping time with what the thrusters are doing, or is the cable actually attempting to lift Argus up?
The first one, yeah. Cable's keeping time with Herc. So Herc sets the pace on the way up, and Antonella's been adjusting the winch as Herc's speed changes. There's a couple, anyway, it doesn't matter. Herc's speed coming up will vary a little bit in between, 14 to 18, whatever, meters a minute, and Antonella will adjust the winch to match.
Interesting.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good to know. I guess I just assumed that the winch was pulling up the vehicles, but that's not the case.
So it can, if there's a problem with the vehicle, if we lose communication or whatever, the winch can pull up the vehicle, but it's a little slower, less efficient, and a lot harder on the equipment. So we try to avoid it unless, you know, it's a good fallback procedure if something goes wrong.
You know, in the old days with our really old ROV at HURL, the Hawaii Undersea Research Laboratory, there was one night where we were using a threaded steel cable, and some of the threads broke and became untangled, broken off. And then as the cable was being pulled up through the pulley, it started causing more and more of the threads to actually fray until we had sort of a gigantic knot on the end there, and that was the end of pulling the ROV up. It totally stopped it, and we were about 700 meters down.
Oh no.
And that was a very memorable night for me because for whatever reason, I drew the short straw, and I was leaning out over the side of the boat up on the arm with wire cutters, cutting away
Oh my gosh.
all the stuff to free it. So that was pretty wild. It took about, I think, an hour to 2 hours to cut enough of that away so they could continue. doing it.
Painful.
Yeah.
Anybody who's gone fishing and created their own bird nest with their reel knows what kind of nightmare that can be with just monofilament. And imagine with braided steel wire.
Braided, that's the term for it. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, it just shows you how the technology has evolved.
Yeah, so this cable isn't just a cable connected to the ROVs. It's also, it has fiber optic cables in it, and it's transmitting all the incredible imagery that you're seeing up through that cable. There's also power from the ship to the ROVs that's going down that cable. So there's a lot of sensitive equipment embedded in the core of this cable that connects us to the ROVs.
Oh.
Quite a bit of data going up from the 4K cameras that we have on these vehicles. Quite a bit of power for light. ROV guys, how many lumens about do we have on this Hercules?
Oh, I think I know the answer to that. I think it's about. Oh man, no, I don't know the answer. I think the three LED lights on an Argus are about 20,000 lumens each.
Wow.
That's 60,000 on Argus. And let me think about that. How many lights are on Hercules? 10, 12, 14,
Do we want to
15,
mention that question?
75,000 on Hercules, maybe? I don't know, something like that.
It's like full-on stadium lighting at the bottom, and the ones on Herc are those are LEDs now, right?
Yeah, they're all LEDs except for 2 small auxiliary lights on Argus.
It's incredible. The LED technology has come so far over the last 20 years or so. It's amazing. But still, that generates a ton of heat, right? So if those lights were on at the surface, they might shatter. Is that right?
Yeah, they can run on deck for 15, 20 minutes or something there.
Oh, okay.
They're a lot cooler running than the incandescent ancestors, which, you know, you wouldn't want to run on deck for more than a minute.
They'd overheat, yeah.
They'd overheat. Yeah, they're not meant to be run in air. They have cooling fins that work on flow of water around them, but they're pretty good. They're a lot more tolerant than the older technology.
Yeah, that's what's nice at operating at these depths. It's near the temperature of the water is near freezing, so it serves a cooling function for those types of equipment that are dissipating heat like the lights.
I see a question that we missed 14 minutes ago. Is asking whether Steve Oskovitz had any updates from the samples of the Phoenix Islands, and he's left the control room, so I'm not really sure about that. But I'll try to ask him, and maybe get back with Jason tomorrow when we do our next dive.
I want to see one of these beautiful ctenophores. It's one of my favorite water column animals.
Yeah.
Just amazing. I was reading in the update from the deep sea, several deep sea expeditions, and they found one that was, I believe, like 70 meters long. I'd have to look at the thing, but it was like considered one of the longest animals on Earth.
Is this a ctenophore or a salp? Because those salps can get really, really long.
Yeah, maybe it was a salp. Maybe I'm miscategorizing it.
Could have been. I just don't know the midwater animals very well at all. There are some real specialists out there that are absolutely amazing what they know about these gelatinous animals. Most of which they're able to ID from imagery because they're hard to sample.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing is we didn't really know a lot about or even know of these animals until the observational methods came into, because previous sampling mechanisms would have destroyed the animal on the way up. If you've got a bucket sample or even some kind of net, a planktonic net or nekton net sample, it just destroy these animals. But seeing them in situ in their native habitat, it just is incredible, the structure they take and the way they function in the water column.
You know, the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, or MBARI, I think was one of the institutes that really revolutionized the collection of gelatinous midwater animals.
Oh, yeah.
They've got some special boxes and sort of suction samplers, and I've seen
neat.
some of their videos, and it's pretty amazing. You know, and the way they do it too is they can collect it and then keep it in chilled water so the animal's intact without damaging it, and then they can get it up and they could actually video the tape the animal also in boxes up in the lab and do some things. So that's really challenging to study those animals. So again, that's emerging technology.
Yeah. Yeah, they're so fragile. I mean, they're just wisps of not even fleshy material, you know, basically like a jellyfish in a vertical line, but not even as sturdy as a jellyfish.
So I'll go out on a little limb here. Since we're in the water column, we can talk a little bit about water, even though I don't know tons about it. But there's some really interesting phenomenon that occur in the water column in deep water here. And the ROV is always measuring things like temperature and salinity and depth and pressure and oxygen concentration as well. And temperature kind of does what you sort of expect it to do. You know, it's going to be warmer at the surface as you get deeper and deeper. It starts getting colder and colder, and then it gradually sort of tapers out, you know, right around 1 to 2 degrees centigrade, where it stays quite low. You know, you're right above freezing right there at these depths. And I didn't actually look at the CTD data when we've been up here, but it's probably between probably a little bit over 1 degree centigrade.
Yeah.
But that's nothing surprising. That's what you would sort of expect. But salinity and oxygen can do some kind of weird things. And oxygen is, of course, is going to be highest at the surface because you get mixing and contact with the atmosphere. And oxygen will start dropping as you start getting down and kind of almost looking like a typical temperature type of profile. And it'll get to a point.
Yeah.
And then it starts going back up again.
Huh. Well, that's very interesting.
That very low point is what's referred to as the oxygen minimum zone. And that can be at different depths in different locations here. And it's just bizarre. It sort of just shows this thing going down and then starts going up again. And I looked at the oxygen minimum from yesterday's dive, and it was kind of typical for this area. The minimum occurred right around 750 meters depth, and it was right around 1 milligram per liter is one of the way it's measured. It's also measured in micromoles per liter, but I like these nice whole numbers. You know, well, I guess micrograms from molar too are it's pretty standard.
Yeah.
But anyway, out here in the Hawaiian Islands and a lot of islands, you don't get what they call a true oxygen minimum, which is generally defined as the oxygen reaching 0.5 milligrams per liter, which is considered anoxic to most animals.
Okay.
And we got down to about 1, you know, so it's sometimes referred to this as the insular oxygen minimum because it's not really a true one. But the fact is, even if we're not getting to, excuse me, even if we're not getting to anoxic conditions, there's not that many animals that can tolerate 1 milligram per liter. That is very low oxygen regardless. So it's going to have an impact on the communities down here in deep water. And what's interesting is that you're going to have some animal, the oxygen is going to be higher above this minimum. You know, typically anywhere between 8, you know, a value of 8 milligrams per liter, you know, and it keeps dropping down till you get to 1, and then it starts crawling back up to around 3, at least at the depths we're diving at. but you can have 3 above the minimum, and you can have 3 below the minimum, and you can have some animals that are doing well, you know, above and below the oxygen minimum, but they're avoiding that really low point and that low depth of oxygen because they can't handle it. Then you have other animals that really like low oxygen that seem to be what we call OMZ specialists. That
What are they called?
It's called OMZ, oxygen minimum zone, but they're sort of specialists because they kind of evolved to take advantage of this very low oxygen. Now the corals we're looking at, they can go right through it, the oxygen minimum as well, but you can still see some patterns where some corals seem to try to avoid that minimum, while others seem to be, they don't really care. You know, you'll see a particular species and its depth range will go right through it, so it doesn't seem to matter. And that's another thing we're trying to entangle. There's a lot of people, including myself, that think that one of the major environmental factors that's affecting the stratification of communities in the water column is oxygen and what it's doing down there. So people are trying to study this right now. And sorry, I've got a little frog in my throat. But I like to look at it. But also salinity, believe it or not, there's a salinity minimum. Of course, it's not as dramatic as oxygen.
Yeah.
But it affects buoyancy, as I'm sure you know. And animals that spawn eggs into the water column, it could impact whether their eggs either float or sink, you know, and they could float for a while, and then they say they become neutral and sort of stay. And I've always sort of wondered whether or not that's why you get certain animals only at this particular depth range, because you know, their eggs actually can't break this sort of salinity minimum or something, or they just go neutral and they don't get up any further.
So what drives that? What drives that oxygen change? Or I mean, what is the driver for that?
I think it has to do with the metabolism of organic matter that's coming from the surface. You know, where there's a lot of waste products, as there's various microorganisms and other things, but I'm not very good at that type of thing. And then I remember there was an old tale, and I don't know if it still holds or something, but that there's a lot of cold oxygenated water that's continually coming from Greenland, and it forms kind of a stream that goes down through the Atlantic and around South America and into the Pacific. And originally I had heard that came all the way up to Hawaii as well, which is responsible perhaps a bit of a rise in the oxygen below that. And then there's other, I think more modern thought is that it only gets up to about American Samoa or something like that, but I don't know much about it as well. I think it's pretty well understood. I'm afraid I'm just not very educated.
That's one of the reasons why they say we have quote unquote ancient water in the Pacific, right? Because it's kind of towards the end of this halide circulation of deeper water currents. And that plays into the whole climate change thing, because that water that comes from Greenland, goes around South America, comes into the Pacific, may have been accumulated 100 years ago or longer, and so it can give a picture of what the atmosphere was doing at that time, and so it has a bit of a delay. The climate change may have a bit of a delay in terms of being reflected in the Pacific because of that. At least to the deeper waters.
Well, I don't know if this company is still around because I haven't been following it that much, but you know, at the National Energy Laboratory of Hawaii, NELH, over on the Big Island, there was a company taking advantage of this very deep, cold water, and they were actually bringing this up through the deep sea pipe, and then they were essentially desalinating it. I think using a reverse osmosis or something like that process. and then they were bottling it and selling it.
They do. They still do.
They still do?
Yeah, they still do. In fact, they've done. They're deriving other derivative products of it. The latest one, I think, is this ocean vodka. So they're making spirits, alcohol spirit beverages from this deep sea water, and it's part of their marketing campaign.
Wow.
Yeah. It's pretty wild. I mean, it's interesting. If you've never tried it, you ought to try it. I mean, it's expensive.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's unique. It's a unique product, and whoever thought of that was pretty clever to come up with that idea to do that.
So they take ocean water, desalinate it, and
yeah, very deep ocean water.
Wow.
Yeah, and then they'll turn it into drinking water, you know, but they'll keep a lot of the content, the mineral content, and they're sort of marketing it as being a bit healthier for you because it's still got some things and fewer contaminants and so forth.
So do they buy that water? Like who regulates how much water is taken from the ocean?
Well, I mean, they have this big, huge pipe down there that's bringing up all this water, and they lease property on this big laboratory space there. So you have a variety of different operations. There's some aquaculture facilities there that are using the cold seawater to raise colder water species.
Yeah, that was one really interesting thing about they're raising oysters there at Nelha, and part of the reason why is because on where a lot of these oyster farms, there still are some, but there are a lot more of them used to be in the Northwest, and because of climate change and acidifying waters, they were having problems raising oysters in the Pacific Northwest and these oyster farms because the water was too acidic for the spat to form and attach. And so the Hawaii oyster industry really took off because the acidity of the water it's not nearly as acidic as the waters in the Northwest. And so they did extremely well in this water that they were producing at Nelha. And they have an amazing oyster farm over there, and it's saved a lot of because once it gets past a certain point, then they can grow in more acidic waters, so they're sending back spat to the Northwest and raising further there, but that's kind of been a saving grace for that industry.
You know, there's another company that I don't know if they're still in business. I think they are still in Oahu that were actually raising a cold water type of algae, and several different varieties of. One of them was spirulina, I think was the name of it, and then I've forgotten what the red one is called, but they were raising this in the cold water, and then they were extracting it and providing it sort of as a bottled health product, a very nutritious bottled health product. And so it's kind of unique, the companies, you know, whoever thought of bringing up all this cold seawater, and then all these other companies are trying to figure out how best to use this and what they can make from this cold seawater, and sky's the limit almost. You know, it's just using your imagination to.
They have a seahorse farm over there, and they have some really other unique industries at Nelha.
They have a seahorse farm?
Really?
I didn't know. See, I've been out of touch with them for a few years.
Yeah, you could do tours there. They have tours of all the industry, and
wow.
And that's also where we have our only Hawaiian monk seal hospital, Keikaiola, over in that Nelha area, and that's where they bring in monk seals that young pups that may not be nutritionally, they're having challenged nutritionally, and they bring them there and they rehabilitate them and then send them back to where they captured them from northwestern Hawaiian Islands. We've flown a few from Midway and other places to that facility to be rehabilitated. As many of our viewers know, the Hawaiian monk seal is a critically endangered species in Hawaii. There's only 1,400 of these animals left on Earth, and so it's very important for particularly every female seal to survive, to allow that population to continue to grow. There's some cool things at that Nelha facility. If anybody, the viewers, travel over to Kona, make sure to go check it out and do some of the tours down there and see the really interesting technologies they're developing.
Well, you know, I was over there years ago is because sometimes some small animals come up the pipe as well.
Oh.
And they had a little sump there on the surface, and it was kind of set up to catch some of this stuff.
Yeah.
And they were pulling up all these small animals, and they need a little help in identifying things and so forth. And they got some really interesting things coming up through that pipe. Animals, in fact, there was a new species of shark that was described, a very small deep water
Oh, wow.
shark that had come up through the pipe, and they got a professional photographer to actually photograph the shark while it was still alive for a while at the surface, and then it turns out it was a brand new species that got described. So it was very cool, and they also had a school over there on the grounds in Elha, and the students were really getting into checking the sump for weird deep water animals and
That's
collecting
cool.
them. And
Poor shark got sucked up through the sump.
yeah, but you know, speaking of the rehabilitation of the monk seals, the NOAA facility on Ford Island, the Inouye Center, IRC, the Inouye Regional Center, I guess is what it's called, they also have a facility, and it's being maintained by a guy I worked with for years, Aaron Moriwaki over there, who, when we did a lot of work on aquaculture over at the Oceanic Institute before I got involved in deep sea research.
Yeah.
And they do kind of the same thing over there. They'll get some sea turtles or other types of things that are in trouble, and they'll bring them to that facility and maintain them for a while and treat them for wounds, for example.
Or ingestion of fish hooks is the,
Yeah.
I've seen several that have come through.
Yeah, so there's a couple places where they're really trying to help some of these very important species over there, and NOAA is very involved in that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very nice to know that these places exist. And
yeah, it's important for the survival of these animals.
yeah.
Well, we aren't seeing much biology.
I know. Trying to think of interesting topics here while we're looking at a completely blue screen,
yeah.
but not even any shrimp.
Oh, there's a jellyfish.
Oh, there's one there.
Chris, what's your favorite color blue?
Boy, sort of more of a cobalt, I should say.
Oh, cobalt's a good one. Yeah, cobalt's a good one.
How about you?
I would say deep.
Deep blue.
Deep blue.
Yeah, a navy blue.
That's another good one.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a jellyfish.
Yeah. So, what would you describe this color that we're looking at right now?
Well, it's not shallow.
Oh, we just got inked, I think. Isn't that what just happened? I just saw some stuff go flying by.
Yeah, that or jellyfish went through the prop.
Is that what it was, or was it a squid that inked us? I don't know.
Not sure.
Not sure either. What was the name? So, of course, I live on Washington over in Port Townsend right now on the Olympic Peninsula. And a couple weeks ago, we were sort of walking along the beach over by this marvelous park that's called Fort Worden State Park over there. And there were all these jellyfish that had washed up on the beach, and I'd never seen this thing before. I took pictures of it, and I think it was called something like Victoria's Crystal or something, the jellyfish, because it looked like a crystal bowl with a rim around it. And they have sort of a hollow in the top of it. And everybody, there are a bunch of people that are all taking pictures of it too that have lived there a lot longer than we have. And I was just totally astonished. And then we saw some in the water as well. And then I went and Googled it because one of the people told us what they thought it was. And sure enough, they were right. But even in shallow water, I'm utterly surprised by seeing all these new animals that I never knew about before.
Yeah.
You know?
Victoria's crystal.
Yeah. It was a really apt name for it because it really looked like a crystal bowl that you would put, you know, mint candies in or something. And it's very durable. It wasn't like a fragile thing. It kept its whole shape. It had a thick wall around it.
Yeah.
We got a couple critters there. Somebody, I'm not. I think it's a small crustacean. Wouldn't you say over there by the?
Yeah, it's running away from us. So like an isopod or something.
Yeah. I'd like to see a megamouth shark suddenly swim up to the camera. Would that be wild?
Or a sperm whale. I'd go for a sperm whale. I kind of go for anything right now. It looks like.
Well, then that little white spot there, which is probably a small amphipod or some type of crustacean. That's
what I'm hoping to see on this cruise is another one of those megatooth squids. I love those with the incredibly long trailing tentacles. Those are gorgeous animals.
Yeah. It just reminded me a story of Nellha since we were talking about this. A squid came up once, got sucked in, and it made all the news, and it was dubbed the octo squid because squid are supposed to have 10 arms.
Yeah.
You know, 8 that are kind of shorter and then 2 long ones. And this is like this incredible new octo squid with only 8 arms. And I went over there to get it. You know, it was frozen.
Yeah.
And I went over there to get it. And then we happened to have a squid expert still at the University of Hawaii, which I then passed it on to. And he said, Chris, this isn't really an octo squid. It just lost its 2 big long arms when it came up the pipe.
Oh, no. I'm sure it's not a gentle process being sucked to this giant vacuum.
Yeah, you got to be a little careful sometimes with your brand new species notices. By the way, that new shark, they dubbed him Marty the micro shark.
That's a cute name, Marty the micro shark. Siphonophore, that was what I was.
Yeah, siphonophore.
Siphonophore.
Sure.
Large.
Yeah, I should have thought of that too. That's with the really long, when you're talking about the really long arms.
Yeah.
Yeah. A little crustacean that went through the water there.
So I'm curious how many still pictures did we have in this dive?
How many still pictures?
Still pictures. Just pictures of.
Oh,
I guess our data logger would have that. Yeah. Kainalo, can you tell us how many pictures?
Yeah, you know, usually we can tell when we do the post-processing with the data. So when we take the images, it'll send it to a file folder, and then we go through it, and that's when we can see how much pictures we took. But yeah, we can't really. There's no way, I guess, right now that we can tell. We just
when
take the picture and it goes to a folder.
For the
on
science,
the other side, yeah.
For the science communication fellows to go through.
Oh no, I mean you can if you want, but we also usually process them and then pick out the ones that we want and put them in separate folders.
Okay, well I'm just wondering how many pictures we got on this one compared to on this dive compared to the dive that's coming up. Because that's going to be longer, and it seems like we are going to see a lot more.
Well,
species.
If the dive coming up is twice as long, then probably going to be about twice as many photos on there. And there was quite a lot taken yesterday because I looked through the folder yesterday.
And
it was the day before yesterday because we were transiting yesterday for that first dive on what we call Seamount A. Quite a lot of photos were taken.
And then it seems like we are going to have much more biodiversity.
We can hope, but we also are starting pretty deep again. We're going to start at 3,010 meters, again, to try to nail down whether this boundary really exists for these high-density communities. But it's so long that we'll get up into the, as we call it, the sweet zone there. And we'll see. I've got my fingers crossed. But given that length of time and given the depth range that we're going to go through, we should see a lot of difference. And that's also what we want to do, see a lot of different transitions as we go up this ridge tomorrow.
What's our starting depth range for tomorrow?
It's going to be 3,010 meters is the start point of the dive.
Yeah, Chris, just to clarify, we're diving again at noon, right?
Is that enough time for the ROV to, I'd love it.
Whoa, Trevor.
Yeah, 4-hour turnaround is what we like to budget. Sometimes we can get it done faster than that, but we don't like to rely on that in case we find some small little issue.
Right.
But 4 hours is a pretty normal turnaround time.
So when do you anticipate we're going to get to the surface today?
In 106 minutes.
And it's
So I thought it would be like just after 8.
6.
That
So
wasn't a
then-
very useful answer. It's an hour 45.
Hour and 45. So is that going to work, or is that really tight to try to get it in at noon? Or
We'll do our best.
okay.
I think it's realistic, but not 100% chance. Does that make sense? It's never 100% chance, but yeah, it's
Sure.
realistic.
Okay, well, we'll certainly try, because I think we're all eager to get back down here.
So am I.
again. So
Yep.
Well, you can time it so that when we hit the bottom is right when the biologists are coming on staff, so we can get our first crack at the collecting receptacles. So don't
hey,
don't try to.
even though he's a TZ geologist, the geology is such an important part of this cruise. We're going to collect rocks no matter what. But yeah, we'd like to get a few critters on this next dive too.
Would you consider a coral or a sponge a critter?
Yes.
Definitely.
Is a critter refer to just animals?
Yeah, it's kind of our little slang.
Would you call
term for-
bacterial mat a critter?
Sure.
Okay, so we're outside the animal kingdom now.
Well, probably Beth and Meredith probably wouldn't like the way I refer to microbiology. I call them bugs. But, but you know, if we call our stuff critters, why not bugs? We all got to have a, poke a little fun at ourselves.
I think so.
Well, getting back to the rocks, I know that Dr. Orcutt was down in the lab yesterday processing some of her samples collected on the first cruise, and was a little surprised by how thin the ferromanganese crust was on some of those rocks. It was really maybe a 1/10 of an inch or so, or a couple millimeters. It wasn't very thick, and that starts to cascade a series of questions as to how old some of these seamounts actually are. What was your figure yesterday, Chris, for the accumulation, or just the average accumulation on over millions of years?
Well, there's not any one rate for how fast the manganese crust forms, because there's so many things that are
So many
involved in
variables.
that. One of the things is, and that's one of the things that Beth, Dr. Orcutt, I'm going to call her Beth, is looking at, is potentially the relationship between these microorganisms and the actual precipitation of these crusts. And right now the thinking is that it's mediated by these microorganisms to a certain extent. And so they're enhancing or accelerating this precipitation, if I understand things correctly. But it also is sedimentation can retard the formation of the crust itself. That's not good. If you imagine it sort of as an abrasive in one sense, or covering up the surface so that the actual minerals can't
Thank you.
settle on it.
Okay, right.
And again, current speed, so high current areas are typically where you tend to get more crusts, and clean swept areas where you can get thicker crusts. There's another thing too, oxygen is involved, and so unless things have changed, there was an inverse relationship between the amount of oxygen and one of those minerals, cobalt in particular, is deposited in the crust, and that's why some of these seamount nodules are of interest to the mining industry, because they're closer to the oxygen minimum zone in these places, and so the precipitation of cobalt is faster in a lower oxygen environment. So they tend to call this part of the Pacific and the crust to be cobalt-rich manganese crust. And so each of these minerals is potentially sensitive to different types of environmental factors and how fast they precipitate. So, but as a general rule of thumb, it's somewhere around, 2 to 2.5 millimeters per million years, if I remember properly how it grows.
Yeah.
So it takes a while to actually get a nice, good, thick rind, if you will, on top of these rocks, of the crust.
That's a long time.
Yeah, and just speaking with her about this, because I don't know much about the microorganism communities with these crusts, they can actually live inside the crusts themselves. That's why she can bring them up in these boxes and not worry too much about the conditions and so forth, because they're inside all these pores and layers in the crust themselves, so they're only exposed when she breaks them open.
Yeah.
There, so
Interesting.
it's just so many cool things that are happening in the deep sea. It's just and if you think about it, and I'm going to say this, and I'm going to mention this in several times during this cruise, 70% of the Earth's surface is deep sea. 30% is terrestrial, right? So I always contend that if you don't know anything about the deep sea, you really don't know the planet you're living on, because we live on a water world, and we live in a world that's primarily very dark, high pressure, very cold, and that's where a lot of the life on this planet exists. And we're kind of strange organisms in a way, because we've evolved to actually take advantage of gaseous oxygen as a source of, of deriving energy. And most life on Earth is using sort of liquid oxygen, or at least dissolved oxygen.
Well, every cell is surrounded with water inside and out.
Yeah. We're water beings, and so I like to think of ourselves being more the extremophiles, or the extreme animals, and everything down here, which we think is such a foreign extreme environment, as being kind of the natural environment on Earth. I think I'm kind of in the minority.
Yeah, no,
interesting.
That makes sense
I haven't thought of it that way, but
yeah. So in one sense, what we're trying to do here is learn more about our planet that we live on. Not just the weird part of the planet, the majority of the planet.
Majority of the planet, yeah. Well, again, it gets at this this kind of human anthropomorphic perspective on things that may not be actually indicative of the percentages of these areas or these organisms. It's just more, and it's one of the challenges that we face as educators in talking about the deep sea, because many people never even get to explore the oceans or get to swim in the oceans. Many people are
their entire
landlocked.
lives.
Yeah.
I'm teaching in LA, downtown LA, surrounding South LA. I mean, there are many students who haven't seen the ocean, and we are just like 20 miles away from the ocean. So.
Yeah, even in Hawaii, I mean, even though we see the ocean, there's quite a large majority of the population that doesn't swim, that doesn't know how to swim, and
Really?
they don't often get in the ocean, and so I even found that very interesting, running a cruise with some participants from Micronesia and Melanesia, and I thought that these folks living on these tiny islands would be part fish, but actually quite a few of them couldn't swim. It's the first time they had actually snorkeled was coming out on this cruise. So